Amnesia Rebirth is a weird game. It kind of feels like the devs put Firewatch and Outlast 2 on a blind date and got surprised when they didn't have chemistry, so they started peeling their fucking skin off. Rebirth is a sequel to Amnesia, no not that one, but at the same time it tries to become its own entity and it doesn't really work that well. The Amnesia series thrived due to its horror atmospheres and constant sense of dread and tension. There were hidey stealth sections that cramped the player into the fatal position, but there were also interesting physics and inventory puzzles to solve in the downtime. The pacing was consistent and the story unraveled itself the further you got into the game. You find out you did the shit, as the French say, and the game constantly forces you to think about your actions not only as the character Donnell, but also as the player. Now Rebirth has all of that, so why doesn't it work this time around? The emotionally charged up story was definitely an amp up from the one in the Double D. The music and sound design were just as good, if a little less memorable, and the environments and level design were also big highlights in the campaign. You're always somewhere new doing something different, but sometimes the game throws up its hands, does a big fat shit on the floor and says bored now before crushing Tassie under a fucking rock or piece of military equipment. The whole game just feels like Frictional crossed things off of a big checklist they'd written once they heard they were about to debut on fuckoutofmoney.com. Sanity system requiring the player to utilise light and dark areas? Check. Slightly humanoid enemies but disfigured enough to not be fuckable? Check. Actual gameplay mechanics so at least one of our products can be legally classed as a game? Czechoslovakia. Oh wait, let's talk about those mechanics for a second though. Early on in the game, the amulet you've been wearing on your wrist, no we won't tell you how it got there, lol amnesia, comes to life and you can use it to bridge rifts between dimensions. At first you use it to discover what this underworld is, and after a brief sightseeing tour of the colour green, you go through a rift and just happen to end up back in the same cave system and not in the cafe next to the fucking military base. After that you only use it a handful of times as the game's way of saying, hey you can do this now, remember that, isn't that cool? But along the way you find tiny one-off rooms that are completely pointless and just there so they can say that the mechanic's getting used. Another mechanic you get is you can hold down X to suck back in Tassie's queefs so you don't alert the scary monsters because now they can smell you. A new enemy mechanic that changes nothing in the 3 times you encounter the one enemy type with a nose. What else? Oh, you can crouch super low to the ground now. That's fucking useless. So fucking useless that the game doesn't even bother telling you it's a feature. I only found it out by chance on a second playthrough pissing about with the debug options and making the game look like a fucking circus. It's worth mentioning the monsters too. They're shit. Let's see what else is on this checklist. Amnesia. What do you mean we need to work the whole amnesia thing into the story as well? The thing about this game is that the amnesia crutch just doesn't fit into anything. With Castle Escape and Meat Spin, you had amnesia because you wanted to forget about the terrible things you've done in the past. In Rebirth, you didn't do anything bad? Let me lay out the story as I understand it to make sure we're all on the same page here. Your plane crashed in the desert that's magically connected to an underworld ruled by a godlike queen who wants to have a child. This queen is being kept alive by her subjects, torturing hundreds of thousands of people and harvesting their vitae to stay immortal. You, Tassie, are pregnant and have recently lost a child due to a rare genetic disease, with your current bun in the oven also suffering the same affliction, although no one knows that yet. This god comes to your group and goes "Sardid," and offers you all health and protection so you don't burn to death in Borderlands 4 Algeria edition. All she asks for is Tassie's unborn baby. Tassie, a mother having already lost a child, politely declines, but the all-powerful god who can fly around, change physical form, translate physical matter, bitch slaps everybody with a curse before driving away in her ghost car, sticking a middle finger out the fucking window. Your entire crew is being transformed into unrecognisable monsters that just so happen to also lose their memory because why the fuck not? And Tassie somehow goes from the final level in the game all the way back to the plane crash site just to sit there in a 40-degree broken airplane on her lads, drawing her dead kid and all of her remaining memories down. Nobody knows how she ended up there. She doesn't bother looking for her friends or husband, and that's when you realise the entirely specific and coincidental story carries no weight because of how heavily forced it was, just so they could match the title of the game with the theme of those prior. Donnell tortures innocent people after being manipulated by a demon ghost man thing. Manard kills and cooks people for the world's biggest hot dog eating contest. All Tantan does is not give her child to some ghost bitch, to which her entire crew of 30, 40 and 50 year olds go, bro what the fuck, I don't want to die, give her your baby. The baby is more important to you than your friends and husband. Yeah, no fucking shit, you dumbass. Your friends would 100% understand that having a child is one of the most taxing and difficult things you could commit yourself to, and the husband would gladly give his life to protect his newborn. What kind of dumbass excuse is that? I have a lot of gripes with the game, but there's a lot of good things to talk about too. The desert setting is pretty convincing at times, even though it takes literally bugger all work to create. It's believable enough with a lot of well-detailed indoor and outdoor environments though. The Dark World, as it's called, apparently no one could be asked to think of a fucking name for the place. Should have named it Swindon or somewhere as equally as bland and miserable. It's got some interesting environments in it, but that's another example of something that's just piss easy to design. Everything's coated in darkness thicker than Tassie's husband. Oh damn sir! So they didn't even need to texture half of it. Overall the lighting and colours were pretty well done, and the game just looks really good when it's not being covered up by blurry visual effects and fucking hentai. The voice acting is by far the highlight of the game, and it completely steals the show here. Most of the characters have an interesting depth to them, and they felt like a real person. Alex Wilton and Ronald McDonald Reagan gave a fantastic and believable performance as Tantan. For some reason, everybody complained about Tassie talking every 3 seconds, but come the fuck on, she just survived a plane crash, found her dead husband and co-workers, and she's travelling through dimensions she doesn't know, and she's becoming unnaturally and rapidly pregnant. She's allowed to talk to herself to calm herself down, for fuck's sake. And last but not least, the music and sound design is another thing worth praising. The wriggling squelches of the hentai in your ears is fucking disgusting to listen to, and is enough of a reason to get out of the dark. A friend of mine compared it to ASMR, but I love ASMR. This was more like CUNTOFF. The music featured a lot of throwbacks to Dark Descent with its sweeping strings and choirs, and even Machine for Pigs with some clockworky ticking noises. Overall, it's hard to describe Rebirth because of how much context you need to be aware of around the game. Amnesia the Dark Descent kickstarted an internet revolution, changing the online culture and by extent the gaming industry. Soma provided an interesting look at a possible future of our world with AI, while also throwing these terrifying existential questions at you, making you look at your own life and decisions. All Rebirth did was bankrupt the fucking company. In all seriousness, it's a great game at times. The story is interesting enough and the environments are fun to be a part of. The atmosphere is always tense and foreboding, and the music and sound design is again just porn for the ears like every other one of Frictional's titles. It's a shame the game ends the way it does. There was so much build up to an interesting and decent ending for the story, and we just didn't get that. Every choice is entirely underwhelming and there's no sense of achievement or payoff. It didn't need a conventionally happy ending, but it did need an ending that was worth working towards. I guess it's a trend now that every Amnesia game is a boring and challengeless final moment. It's also a trend now that every Frictional game starting with the letters RE are bound to be divisive and muddled. Looking at you, Requiem. I'd say play it if you care for a decent story and game world with stealth elements and physics puzzles available now on Steam. But if you decide to skip this one, then you're not missing that much.